This game was played on September 1st, 1957. And I don't really know much about Attilio di Camillo. We've seen his name come up several times on this program. But I do know he was from Philadelphia. He was born May 28th, 1917. He passed away February 17th, 1962. So relatively young. That would have only been 44 years of age. And he was a national master. You see his rating there, 2367. Let's see how this game unfolded. Of course, we start with e4. I say, of course, Bobby was still playing some Retti's openings/King's Indian attacks. But we have a French defense from Di Camillo. Pawn d3, pawn d5. This really is a King's Indian attack structure. Knight d2 and bishop d6. King's knight to f3, pawn c5, pawn g3. Knight c6, now bishop g2. And this is definitely the King's Indian attack type of setup. King's knight to e7, both sides castle. Bobby with rook e1, and Attilio with queen c7. This doesn't really go anywhere with this blunted diagonal, but it does discourage fixing the center. So c3, bishop d7. And now queen e2 was played, and pawn f6. Pawn a3, now queen's rook to e8. Black having moved all of his pieces now. Not liked by the annotator is queen's rook e8, d4 being indicated, although a5 is the most frequently played move. But in this game, queen's rook to e8 was played, lining up with the white queen. b4 certainly was indicated by these two pawn moves. b6, now d4, pawn takes pawn. And even though Bobby hasn't gotten his bishop or rook out of bed yet, the position is pretty close to equal. And we'll see the C file open right now. C takes d4. Now d takes e4, isolating this d-man. And knight takes e4 is answered by knight d5. Now here bishop b2 was expected. Although I might have played b5 if I were in white's shoes here. The bot not liking bishop b2, calling for knight takes bishop. But what about b5 hitting this knight? I do get a star there. That would compel the knight to e7, and then you could always take this bishop here and play a4. That looks pretty decent in my mind. You have the threat of bishop a3. Let's go back. Bishop b2, played by Bobby Fischer, queen b8, and the king's knight to d2. I actually prefer b5 there as well, with the same continuation that I showed just a moment ago. Bobby with king's knight to d2, and knight to d8 is probably not the most optimal move. One would expect the knight to go to e7, which is indicated by the annotator. Knight does take the bishop here, and queen takes the knight. Now pawn to b5, bishop to c8. Very strange looking move, but I gather he wants to counter his counterpart. a4, queen d7, bishop a3, rook f7, knight to c4, knight b7. And that's going to prevent the white knight from coming to d6, which would in turn fork these two rooks. Queen d3, rook d8. I thought queen d8 was worth a try here. I have no doubt he would then play rook a c1, and then you just slowly build like g6, for example, or rook d7. But Di Camillo with rook d8, and Bobby responds with bishop e4, battery attacking the h-man. G5 discovers a battery defense for the H-man. Now queen's rook to C1 and the knight to E7. The king's bishop takes the knight, and that is frowned upon. I've often said, do not make a trade that helps your opponent invade. That would be applicable here, wouldn't it? The bot calling for king's rook to D1. Well, bishop takes B7, granting sole ownership of the long diagonal. And surely black would have dreams of queen D5 followed by queen G2 or queen H1 checkmate. But knight D6 obstructs the queen, knight F5, and knight takes the rook. Camillo, resorting to his dream, left the knight there and played queen D5. Surely queen takes knight was his best hope. And that would no doubt be answered by bishop B2. And then there's a number of things black could try here. Maybe even just a quiet pawn push. H5, I would gather. Bishop D5 might be a move. But queen D5 is not going to work here because we can simply interpose with our queen. Queen E4. You say, but doesn't that give up a rook? Well, not really, because our knight covers the enemy rook. So instead, Camillo played the discovered attack against the queen, queen D7. Not only attacking the queen, but saying, I'll get that knight after all. Had he played the queen takes queen, rook takes queen, then if you take my rook, I'll take yours. And if you save your rook, well, I'll deflect your knight. In fact, let me put that line up. If you play rook D7 right away even, well, I could play knight D6 here, in fact. And on knight takes knight, then queen takes, bishop takes, and bishop takes knight, rook takes bishop. I have rook C7. That's going to win a pawn. Well, he could play bishop F3 and get this pawn. Yeah. But we are up the exchange, aren't we? Now, we can't take this pawn because we'd be checkmated, wouldn't we? All right, so coming back to what was actually played, queen D7. Discovered attack against the queen, also an attack against the knight. But we have a battery aiming at the E-man, and so Bobby unleashes that battery with queen takes pawn, and that forces a queen trade because we're lined up with this king. So queen takes queen and rook takes queen. Now, I thought knight to H6 first looked interesting, and just decoy the knight. It's a check. Decoy the knight to the rim because the knight on the rim is dim, and then pick up the queen. But Bobby, the master of simplification, just goes straight for it, and king takes the knight, and the rook retreats to E1. King G6, rook C7, bishop F3, and bishop B2 do not take the pawn. Well, I mean, it might not be the end of the world, but I think bishop B2, the move that Bobby played, oh, it says take the pawn. Look at that. I was going to say do not take the pawn. For a pawn, rook takes A7, knight takes D4, and then bishop B2 is answered by knight B3 or knight C2. Well, me and the bot are of different opinions on that. Bishop B2 right away, H5, rook takes the pawn. Now rook C8. I'm not sure why he didn't take this pawn. He's got it under super attack. Feels like that's a good way to keep the fight. But he went with rook C8. Rook C1, again seeking simplification. And really it seems to me now with this passed pawn, white is clearly winning. Rook E8, rook A6, pawn H4, pawn G4. Bishop takes the G-man. Why is he giving this away? Well, that gives his king escape. Rook takes the pawn on B6. Rook to E2. Bishop c3, d5 will be played in due time. h3, sealing this back off. Now, knight e7 is indicated. That's going to be answered by rook d6, no doubt. And if bishop f3, rook e1 can be played, forcing a trade. He either has to trade rooks or trade minor pieces. He doesn't have to take the rook. He can counterattack the bishop, right? And then you have to come right back or you'll be checkmated. But white has all these passed pawns. He's bound to promote one of them. So knight e7 doesn't seem that much more hopeful to me. h3 was the choice, and now d5 is played at last. Knight h4. Rook takes f6 check. That's defended by the bishop. King h5. Pawn b6. Black has troubles. He can expect rook e1, and how to prevent it, I know not. He tries knight f3 check, but Bobby, the master of simplification, gives back some material. And now this pawn stands in this bishop's way so that it cannot cover b7. What a well-placed pawn interfering. Rook e8 tries to defend, but now bishop e5 covers the promotion square. And so the rook will be lost. Since it's going to be lost, he decided, well, I'll just take the bishop then and let you have your queen. Well, you might as well resign. He's going for a last-ditch effort, but that effort will not help because now queen g3. What a move. Queen g3, rook g4, pinning the queen to the king, but white doesn't care. d6, please take my queen. The master of simplification. You can't stop everything. And since there's no way to stop this passed pawn, black resigned. Now we'll point out that on rook takes queen, we would capture with the f-man. Don't give him a passed pawn. But there's no way to stop this pawn because our rook covers that square. So if you try this way, what do we play? We've got another passed pawn to push. And you just can't stop everything, can you? Your bishop becomes overworked. You can't come to c8 because the rook covers. And it's just a matter of time. So that's why after pawn d6, Attilio di Camillo resigned. Hope you enjoyed that one. Let me give you the numbers. Bobby Fischer with a 92.2 accuracy. Attilio di Camillo, 86.5. Single game ratings for Bobby Fischer, 2650. For di Camillo, 2450. A pretty competitive game for the most part, balanced opening, but Bobby definitely a cut above in the middle game.